Hello, my name's Annabelle McGillivray and I'm the Director of Communications with the Australian Institute of International Affairs. Today I'm joined by the Malaysian Ambassador to Morocco, Astana Abdulaziz. Thank you for joining me, Astana.
Thanks for inviting me, Annabelle. It's nice to be here.
Great. You're here at the moment to take part in meetings on the side of the ASEAN-Australia Summit. And so I'd like to explore some issues to do with ASEAN in that case. I guess to begin with, perhaps there's been criticism of ASEAN to a certain extent as the way that it operates and its effectiveness or not. What would you like to say to that?
Thanks, Annabelle. Actually, there has been, I think, some amount of criticism of ASEAN that it is not effective, that essentially it's a talk show. And I think while some of what is being said is correct, the part that is correct is what I think would surprise people. Yes, ASEAN is a talk show. Is ASEAN ineffective because it's a talk show? I don't think it is. Because I think it's crucial to understand why it is that the 10 countries in the region, well, initially 5 countries and then it expanded to become 10, came together to set up a regional mechanism like ASEAN. It was basically so that we acted more in concert with each other. It's so that as neighbors we understood each other better. But we were, many of us, coming out of the grips of colonization. We were at the beginning of the throes of development, and we were all very small. So we realized that we needed to come together and to become more effective in the region by working together. So the whole aim of setting up ASEAN was to come together so that there was a space where the 10 leaders could come together and talk to each other, because talking is essentially very important. You get the talk right, the action will follow. So the criticism that ASEAN just sits and talks and does very little, to my mind, the talking is important, the doing, you get the talking right, the doing will come. The doing will follow. It is not that difficult for leaders to come together, for functionaries to put together action lines, programs, so that there is some doing. But if the leaders are not fully of the same thinking, if there isn't enough talking to foster that, there can be doing, but that doing will not be sustained. So my take of ASEAN is that it has actually been very successful at what it sets out to do, and it actually set out to be essentially a talk show which leads to action that all of the 10 leaders agree on.
So I guess a sign of the success of that talk is the fact that countries such as Australia are hoping to become members at some stage. Obviously that's up for debate, but at this stage Australia is a dialogue partner. How important is that role? What insight does that give Australia to the dynamics of ASEAN?
I think that's an excellent point you bring up, the fact that ASEAN has 10 dialogue partners, and it's very important to know that it was not ASEAN who courted this our neighbors, our partners, to actually become a dialogue partner of ASEAN. It was them knocking on ASEAN's door, and I think that was a very positive reaction to how they see ASEAN as being effective in being able to work together, and they decided that they wanted to work with us. And as Australia is very much in the forefront of this. Australia has the distinction of being ASEAN's first dialogue partner as far back as in the 1970s, I think.
1974.
74. Yeah. So that's wow, that's actually quite a long time. So and I think Australia has always had this feeling that, you know, it is important to be in the region, to be with the region, and of course ASEAN fully appreciates Australia's role and Australia's partnership with us. With some of the individual members of ASEAN, Australia has had tremendous relationships. They're very close with us in Malaysia. In fact, your High Commissioner has got an excellent residence, but that came about simply because they were there very early in that relationship. So this is how it fosters. If I do have a bit of it's not quite a criticism, but a bit of a critique is, but I think this is natural. Perhaps Australia's interest in ASEAN waxes and wanes. I don't know if it's due to domestic politics, due to leadership, etc. But happily, at the moment, I do believe it's very much waxing. It's very much on the rise. Of course, what we would like and what we would hope in ASEAN is that this interest is sustained. There is a lot of cooperation going on between Australia and ASEAN. Australia has been very present in that relationship. However, there is, I think, very very much in the Australian DNA that they would like to see actions and, decisions that lead to actions being done. And that comes through in some of ASEAN's mechanisms, such as the ASEAN Regional Forum, ARF, maybe also the East Asia Summit, both of which Australia is member of. So sometimes, every once in a while, we sense that Australia may exhibit a little bit of impatience at how slow ASEAN functions and within these mechanisms. But what we would like to ask Australia is to understand that there is a lot of value in having all these leaders, be it at ministers level at the ARF or the leaders at the EAS summit, actually just being in the same room talking to each other. That talking is important.
I guess part of the reason why Australia's interest may be waxing at this stage is because ASEAN has been identified, and rightly so, as playing a great role in determining the balance of power in this part of the world. So I'm wondering whether or not you could speak to what role ASEAN has there, or what role you see that it may have there.
I think it's far too much flattery to suggest that ASEAN may have a role in determining the balance of power here. What ASEAN has always faced in this region is there have always been powerful countries waiting to rise, which was China 2 decades ago, etc. Also, the interests of big powers who may be slightly more distant but very much present in the region. So that has always been a reality. Now, it is also a reality that sometimes when you have more than one big power in the region, their interests clash. And therefore, ASEAN has always had to deal with this reality of how do we balance this in our relationship. We can't balance the relationship between big powers, but then what ASEAN has tried to do, especially taking advantage of the fact that these powers are very interested to be involved in ASEAN mechanisms, is, hey, we've got them present, let's put them all around the same table. And so what ASEAN has, which the late Dr. Surin Pisoen, who was the former Secretary General of ASEAN, who was also the former Foreign Minister of Thailand, one of the things he used to say about ASEAN is that one of ASEAN's main advantages is it's got this strong convening power, simply because ASEAN countries are non-threatening. We are all small, none of us are powerful, and therefore no countries even assume that we've got any hidden agenda, because we don't. We're too small to have a hidden agenda. So when we invite countries, even big powers, to sit with us at the table, very often we find that they're quite happy to do it, and they actually take advantage of that opportunity, because among themselves they can't do it, because there's too much at stake, too much, I think too much interplay between them. But to come together where ASEAN is convening them, it doesn't present a challenge to them, and that has been one of the successes. And I think if you look at ASEAN mechanisms like the ASEAN Plus 3 and the East Asia Summit, I think it's really impressive when the meetings are on. As I recall doing in Myanmar in 2014, I looked around the room and we had Prime Minister Abbott, we had Obama in the room, we had Medvedev, not Putin, we had Abe from Japan, we had some of the biggest powers, and they're all convening around the 10 ASEAN leaders, which for many countries they wouldn't even be able to name any of the 10 leaders of ASEAN. So I think that's very impressive.
And possibly a more important role today than it has been, in recent history even. So,
well, I can't say that situation is getting fraught. I think at any point in time, everyone feels that the situation is fraught at that point in time. Certainly, sometimes, every once in a while, we see tensions rising over here. ASEAN tries very hard to bring the temperatures down. Sometimes it facilitates us talking to our dialogue partners. Not always, because sometimes, there's just so much we can do. Big powers will act as big powers want to do. But at least we have the opportunity to voice to them our concerns about what's going on in our region. So that, I think, is a valuable element to ASEAN as well.
Thank you very much for your insights today.
Thank you.
If you would like to have any further information about international affairs and events, please go to www.internationalaffairs.org.au or follow the AIIA on Facebook.